now listening to the NFT Quarterback Podcast with your host, Ricky Van Winkle.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the NFT Quarterback Podcast with your host, Ricky Van Winkle. Today, we're joined by a very special guest, Rob Orton. Now, Rob Orton is an engineer who is very heavily involved in fantasy football. And here at the NFT Quarterback Podcast, we want to give you guys every opportunity to engage with the NFL. And Rob is going to hook us up today by introducing us to fantasy football, kind of what it's about, what you need to do. Well, he's going to talk about it, so I'll let him do that. First question for you, Rob. How would you describe fantasy football?
It's basically like assigning a point system to touchdowns and yards gained by either throwing the ball or touching the ball or rushing the ball to players and stuff. And then you, in the beginning of the league, you distribute the players amongst different people. You have a draft, quote unquote draft, and people select their players. And then throughout the season, you get points for those players as they score touchdowns or get a certain amount of receiving yards or rushing yards and stuff like that. The system, there's a lot of different variations on fantasy football. And then it's gotten even crazier with daily fantasy football. It's like with DraftKings and some of these other bigger companies. The one I played is a little more like the traditional. You have a team, and then you play against somebody else in your league that has a team, and then your players go head-to-head against their players. And so you're only playing against one other person in your league every single week, and then you either win or you lose. And then your record at the end of the season, dictates how you get into the playoffs and stuff like that. And then, we're usually playing for a little bit of money and make it interesting and stuff. And it's just a lot of fun. It really makes you follow the players and the sport as a whole a lot more closely.
Every week you're focusing on certain players that you've drafted, and we'll get into the draft here in a minute. I'm curious, you're focusing on certain players to reach certain milestones within the game, and that is going to tally you a certain amount of points. So you have a certain amount of points every week. And then you're in a one-on-one matchup with somebody else in your league. So you're not tallying points then over the season. Rather, you're just trying to win each week. Is that what you're getting into?
Yeah, but the points that you accumulate throughout the season also matter because you may lose or you may win for a certain week. So let's say your record is 5-5, but there's 3 other people who also have a 5-5 record. Then the tiebreaker is how many points you've accumulated throughout the week. So it is important. It's not just important to win that week. You want to score a lot of points because it's going to matter for the aggregate score.
The world of NFTs is growing rapidly. Get in there today. Go over to partymansion.io to get yourself set up on the Party Mansion Party Goobs Discord channel. That's where the party is really happening in the NFT world. If you're into artwork, digital artwork, go over and check out the Party Mansion.
You guys are using the points as a tiebreaker at the end of the season then. So every point matters. Okay. You were talking about drafting players. When do you draft players, and what method do you use to draft players?
We usually, so you could draft really any time before the regular season. I usually like to draft. It's a live thing, so everybody agrees on a certain time. It's not like one person can draft and then a week later everybody else can draft. Everybody drafts at 8 p.m. on X day. Usually like to draft after the preseason and right before the regular season, because as you know, football is contact sport and guys get hurt a lot, and so it's not unusual for guys to tweak something in the preseason or even during practice and stuff, and so you want to be aware of all the injuries right before the regular season before you draft.
Real quick, I was just going to ask, how do you go throughout the season? If somebody gets injured, can you pick up new players like free agents? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. So after you draft, right, everybody's got players assigned. There's still a bunch of players left over that are undrafted that are not on anybody's team. Those players are on what's called the waiver wire, and so there's this game this Thursday, right? The Dolphins in Cincinnati. Right now, any player on that waiver wire that's on anybody's team is available to pick up. Once that game starts, then none of those players are available to pick up until next Wednesday. And the waiver wire thing gets a little complicated too, but it's basically like if the way our league works is a little different. Like the priority of who gets the first dibs on their waiver wire is assigned by whoever has the lowest ranking. So if you're last place in the league, then you get first pick on the waiver wire. And the way the picks work is that every Wednesday at like midnight, the waiver wire claims go through. So like there might be like a player right now that I want. Like let's say let me think about this. So the game tonight, let's say it gets played. So then Cincinnati and Miami, there's nobody available on those teams until Wednesday. I might still say, like, I want to pick up this person on Cincinnati, and I would just be submitting a claim. But I'm not going to get that player on my team until early Wednesday morning. But if somebody else has a higher ranking in the priority on the waiver, then they're going to get that player if they've also selected him. So yeah, it's a little crazy, but that's a big part of fantasy football too. Is like to be good and you got to be active and paying attention to the waiver wire, like who's available, who's performing, stuff like that, and then being like strategic about when you pick up free players and who you're going to drop on your team that's not performing and stuff like that.
Do you have to leverage anything to get any players from the waiver wire, or is it just if you want them, you get them? Do you have to put anything down? I don't like, you know, a free agent, you would go out there and pick them up and they would have to do a financial commitment, the team would. But you as a fantasy football player, do you need to make any kind of commitment to that player? Or is it just like, I'm going to pick them up off waivers this week and next week I can drop them off again? Or what's the commitment there?
In our league, you don't. You just have to have a higher waiver priority. But in some leagues, which are it's a little cooler to do it this way, I think you can there's no like waiver priority in other leagues. They'll just have, I forget what the acronym is, but you have like kind of like dollars assigned to you throughout the season, and you can spend a certain amount of dollars to pick up the player. Whoever bids the most amount on that player will end up getting him. But then you lose, however much money you spend, I think, for the season. I've never been in a league like that. It sounds really fun. I've listened to some other people talk about their league and they describe that's how it works.
Okay, awesome. And I want to ask you one more question about the draft. I know we got away from it. You said you use a serpentine kind of system in order to determine the order of the drafting. How does that work?
Yeah, it's called a snake draft. So it's basically like if you're the first overall pick in the first round, then you're going to be the last pick in the second round. So if it's a 10-person league, you have the first overall pick, then you're not going to get to pick again until the 20 or the 19th, the 20th pick. You're going to have the first pick and you're going to have the 20th overall pick, but then you're also going to have the 21st pick. So it goes like you're going to be the first person to select in the first round, last person to select in the second round, first person to select in the third round, last person to select in the fourth round, and then those rounds continue. So if you have either the first or the last pick, you're going to get back-to-back picks every round. But if you're like the fifth pick, then you're always going to be, in the middle of the round. And that's just to kind of like, make it a little more fair. If you had the first pick in every single round, then your team would be stacked, and you'd have an unfair advantage just by randomly. Because the apps that we use just randomly assign the priority or the draft order. So yeah, you want to like at least make it a little more fair, and that's why it's a snake format. There are drafts that are different too, and it's kind of like the same thing I was talking about before with the spending the dollars on the waiver. Like some drafts do, it's basically like you have a set amount of money, and then like the players come up like randomly or in some kind of order, and then you bid on whether or not you want that player, and whoever's the highest bid gets that player. So yeah, I'm less familiar with that, but there's multiple ways to perform a draft, and the most basic one, the one that I've done in like almost every single league event, has been that snake format.
Okay, and it's always randomly assigned. It's never like, multiple seasons have accrued with you and your buddies, and then you're saying, okay, top ranked person from last year gets the lowest draft pick? You guys don't do any of that kind of stuff?
I don't know. It's not always consistent, like who's going to be in the league. I haven't been in a league where we get the same people every single year. Just like we always have to add at least one or two people, or somebody drops out or something like that. So we haven't like kept the league personnel consistent enough to be able to do something like that.
What are the two things you need for every football game? Beer and jerky. Now guys, if you have not had Bandits Jerky out of El Paso, Texas, then you have not experienced jerky. Go to their Instagram page today at Bandits Jerky 915. That's Bandits Jerky 915. Over there you can place an order today for one of their 4 different flavors. All these flavors are here to satisfy your cravings, especially on Sunday when it's time for football. They have red chili, lemon pepper, original flavor, and green chili. All these flavors you guys can order today by reaching out to Bandits Jerky on Instagram at Bandits Jerky 915. And when you are enjoying your Bandits Jerky, make sure you take a picture, put it to your Instagram story, and tag at Bandits Jerky 915. Everybody, thank you for listening to the NFT Quarterback Podcast. Let's get back into the show.
You're an engineer. Are you building analytical models for the NFL players to make decisions on who to pick off the waiver wire or before the draft based off last year's data? Or do you just go off of your gut feeling?
Man. No, I'm not. I don't have as much time for that. The app usually gives you a lot of analytics, and there's multiple apps, and they're all pretty much the same, but you can like cross-reference what they're saying about different players, and that usually keeps me pretty up to date on that. And then I'll also listen to some football podcasts and football stuff, and that between all that, I'm able to come to my decisions. But then it's still like it's such a crapshoot. Like that's why it's been like fantasy football's been like legally designated as betting. Like daily fantasy football was getting away with not being designated as betting for a long time, or when it first came out, at least in the United States. And the people who created those services were trying to keep it from being restricted like gambling, but then it was determined that it was gambling just because of how random things come up, like players get injured all the time. And then with like COVID now is extra crazy because they would have to, you don't know who's going to get COVID, then those guys got to sit out for a while. And so, yeah, there's just too much randomness for it to be considered like a non-betting sport.
Okay. Before I let you go, can you tell me which players are you looking at this week? Who's on your roster? What are you rolling with?
Ooh, yeah. I got Josh Allen as my quarterback. I got Cortland Sutton, Gabe Davis, and Jalen Waddle as my third wide receiver. And then my running backs, I got Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara. And then kicker defense. I've been like kickers and defense, I switch around a lot because it seems like they're so matchup dependent, like especially defenses. So I recently picked up the Philadelphia Eagles. They did really well, so I was feeling good about that. It's actually super crazy, dude. So on this last week, I was up by 14.5 points going into Monday's game. The guy I was playing against had CeeDee Lamb. So you get 6 points for a touchdown, right? You get 0.1 points for every yard. So 10 points or 1 point for every 10 yards. So CeeDee Lamb needed a touchdown and 85 receiving yards in order for this guy to catch me. CeeDee Lamb got the touchdown at the end and had 87 receiving yards.
Oh my
so I lost by 2 yards.
Wow.
Just completely crushed.
That's brutal.
Yeah. But that's kind of what makes it really fun too. Like I would never have when fantasy isn't going on, like those games just aren't really exciting. Like Dallas and And in New York, I wouldn't be paying attention to it too much. But yeah, when you got players playing or you're playing against players, then you're really into the game. As far as my team goes, like, feeling pretty good. Jalen Waddle's done a lot better than he was projected to. I picked him up in one of the later rounds, like the 5th or 6th round or something like that. I took Josh Allen pretty early. Usually quarterbacks are taken a little bit later in the draft because people are trying to get those top tier running backs. Because running backs there's just not as many of them that perform really well. It's usually like you'll get, there's like a couple of like big stars, and then a lot of teams do like a running back by committee. So then the points you're going to get from that running back go down if the work is getting split up on that team. But yeah, feeling pretty good about my team. Just been frustrating because like you don't have any control over the points scored against you. And so your team may be doing like pretty well and scoring a decent amount of points. But then if you're getting like the most points scored against you just by chance of who you're playing that week, then you end up like having a poor record. And then it can be like, if you have like multiple weeks of that, then it can be hard to climb up again in the ranking system and come back.
All right, man. Well, Rob, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate your insight.
Thanks, man. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Good talking to you.
For sure.
You have a good day.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of the NFT Quarterback Podcast. Today's guest was Rob Orton, and this episode was produced by RMT Books. Until next time.